Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Alex Morris, and I'm here with the California Energy Storage Alliance to share with you about our California 2022 energy storage market outlook. I'm joined today by Jin No, our policy director here at CSA, and we're going to talk a little bit about who CSA is and what we do, and then we'll share some of our accomplishments this year and then what we're expecting to occur next year. And that'll be a lot of the fun, is looking ahead to next year. And when we get into that, we'll also be joined by Gareth Elliott, who serves as California's CSA's liaison to California government affairs issues. So he works in Sacramento and is very involved in a lot of the political discussions at the Capitol and can help us understand what's going to happen in the state next year politically. So we're going to cover a lot of information today. And at the end, we'll have opportunities to share how you can get involved in CSA and how you also can ask questions to us at the end of the call. So we encourage you to do that, but we're going to try and channel questions towards the second half of this hour-long webinar presentation. So again, welcome everyone. And if you're not familiar with CSA, I look forward to sharing more about it today with Jin, and we'll cover a lot of ground. So a bit of housekeeping. We currently have everyone in listen-only mode, and we do record the webinar, and we will post it on our website at storagealliance.org. Please type in any questions you have into the Q&A box on the GoToWebinar menu, and that way we'll have questions to address at the end of the webinar. And we hope that we get a lot of questions, and certainly have the team here available for you, so we can probably respond to almost any question you may have about the California energy storage market. For those of you who are not familiar with CSA, let me share a little bit about it. CSA is the voice of storage in California. We have over 100 members and serve as a trade association on behalf of the grid-connected energy storage industry. So our members are energy storage industry players, manufacturers, consultants, project developers, etc. And I'll show you the list of our members in a moment. It's also important to note that CSA is a 501c6 nonprofit group, which means we're a classic trade association organization, and we approach the energy storage market with the mission of expanding the role of energy storage in California, creating market opportunities in ways that help California achieve its clean energy and cost and reliability goals. So, and we're funded by the contributions of our members. I always say that a great part of the work with CSA is getting to work with so many companies, and with over 100 companies involved in CSA, we get to see a lot of highly intelligent, talented, committed, and clever companies engaging in this space. And it's a great pleasure to work with you all. These are often referred to as the who's who of the energy storage industry in California. And I hope if you're not part of CSA, that we have a chance to dialogue and that you'll join. We're excited to share more about what's happening in California, and I, at this point, wanted to introduce Jin No, CSA's policy director, and my longtime friend and colleague. And Jin, the way we're going to approach this today, welcome, is to highlight some of the numbers of what's happening in California, and then we're going to get into the details. We're going to look at what was accomplished in 2021, and then we're going to shift to 2022. And so just looking at the audience, we have a lot of people who are very familiar with energy storage in the California market, but some who may appreciate a little more background here and there as well. So let's try to give some high-level takeaways on the slides for those who are less familiar, and those of you who are very familiar, please zip us your questions as we try to get into the weeds and give you the insights that we're working with right now. So Jin, please take it away, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jin No, Policy Director for CSA, and it's good to have everyone, CSA and non-CSA, in this call today. But really, Alex mentioned, we go back for some time. When I started in 2015, the storage market was really nascent, and ever since then, we've had to revise these storage numbers, snapshot that you're seeing here. Every year, and records constantly get broken for how much is being procured, how much we actually need, and how much is actually coming in operation today. And you'll see that shortly in a subsequent graph. And speaking of that, a brief history of storage in California. In the early days, back when founders Janice Lin and Don Liddell really set the stage for California to be the first market to really create all the frameworks, procurement models, contracts, et cetera, in collaboration with many of the utilities and other stakeholders here in California with the energy storage mandate back in those AB 2514 days. And, through 2020, that's really what we focused on, refining that framework, continuing to learn how to procure, assess, value energy storage. But since then, the market for storage has really evolved to the degree that in 2021, toward the end of 2021, and turning into 2022, today we've been walking and jogging, but it really is the start of a sprint from here through 2045. The pace is not going to relent. We're facing a lot of near-term challenges, emergency reliability challenges. We're facing climate change risk. We're facing very aggressive decarbonization goals through 2030 and 2045. And to achieve those goals, we have to achieve build rates and iterate on how storage actually operates in the market at a pace that we've never seen before. We think this year is a record, but to really set the stage through 2045 is we essentially have to have these types of record years year in, year out through 2045. And we'll cover a little bit of that in a bit.
Yeah, and Jin, just as a frame for people, we often refer to California as one of the largest storage markets in the world, and people need references to understand that. When I look at these numbers and where you say the start of the sprint, those numbers are bigger than some entire utilities, including some of the larger utilities in the country. And so, a simple way to frame this for folks is, especially by 2028, where you see over 11,000 megawatts, that's multiple utilities worth of generation fleets being built between now and 2028. So it's the scale of this is astronomically large, even that as part of an electric grid that's very large already. So really significant build outs needed over the next few years. And as the voice of storage, Jim, we work with so many groups trying to help shape the market and make it work. But I think there's also so much texture to that, and it's not just a policy decision and then folks build it. It's bringing together the developers, bringing together the manufacturers who want to be close to their customers, helping the local authorities understand storage, making sure that the planners accurately reflect how storage will operate in the electric system, and then looking to ensure it is operating appropriately and being compensated. All of that work is happening simultaneously, and it's big. So I think sprint is the correct metaphor here.
Yeah, and typically we would think this is we have a lot of time to pace ourselves, but early on in the race to 2045, we have to sprint. And to kind of give you set the stage for this, the way Alex and I approach growing the storage market and evolving the storage market to support these reliability and decarbonization goals is to focus on these three-prong areas. Growing the pie. We want to continue to create opportunities for storage to compete in solicitations, address needs, improving valuation, whether that's in forward-looking planning models or in the procurement and contracting process, to recognize the various different attributes that storage can provide as the ultimate flexible resource, and reducing barriers. And this is particularly an area that we're going to really focus in on in 2022 as to how can we streamline interconnection and permitting, open up market participation pathways, a lot of which has been done, but how can we refine those pathways and developing standards to support scaling. And to that end, let's take a look at the hockey stick growth that we've seen in procurement progress. And this was a graph that was prepared by Lumen at a recent workshop that really encapsulates how much storage has grown. We've seen all the procurement announcements, various large projects coming online, but really, across the board, even as we've seen CCAs and energy service providers take on more and more of this role of procurement, storage growth has grown astronomically, not in a linear way, but in a real hockey stick way to address, near-term summer emergency reliability needs, to address certain near-term retirements in 2021 to 2023, and then again with the largest procurement order that the Commission has ever adopted, with 11,500 by 2026. So this is astronomical, and the first commission that I've seen also direct 1,000 megawatts of specifically long duration energy storage.
Yeah, and I also want to emphasize this is part of the California ecosystem, but not all of it. A lot of the work and the numbers we're sharing today have to do with the California area that's jurisdictional to our Public Utilities Commission, but we're also involved in the work of other large and important utilities like LA Department of Water and Power or SMUD, et cetera. So, in a way, this is always the floor of what we're working with, and you layer on those other things and it's even bigger and more complicated.
Yeah, and that's at the macro level of how big the storage market is. But if we look also on the customer side, the Self-Generation Incentive Program ever since 2008 has been that foundation to help grow the storage market for customers, and it continues to do so. It was only 2 years ago that we adopted a number of changes to support additional focus areas around equity and resiliency. And we're really seeing the program support those objectives, especially with some of the challenges with wildfire and public safety power shutoffs, as well as ensuring that the program does support low income and broadly supports all customers, not just the most well off. And
yeah.
We're continuing to grow the program also for large thermal storage to also be able to participate as well.
Yeah, I think there's a couple special things to note here. I wanted to tip our hat to CSA's founders, Janice Lynn and Don Liddell, who, helped get storage eligible for this relatively small self-generation incentive program, starting all the way back in the 2008 timeframe. And building from there, we've had a tool that has iterated and frankly been quite flexible at figuring out ways to improve how storage additions can help with localized generation needs, focusing even then on thermal storage and on resiliency related storage as the wildfire problem really manifests over the last 4 years in California. So, very cool program, certainly always a work in progress and something that needs tuning, but its transformative effects are undeniable, and these numbers are really significant in terms of behind the meter storage. And what's not reflected here is this includes residential and non-residential, rich areas, poor areas. All of that is encapsulated in the sub flavors of SGIP, and so there's been a lot of compelling thought work that's gone into this, all the way down to checking that the storage is truly helping with getting greenhouse gas reductions, which is also exciting and necessary.
Yeah, and in this post mandate world, really the area where we can actually identify the need for energy storage is in the integrated resource planning processes that we see on a joint agency level, looking at 2045 at the CPUC and their IRP processes. We also engage with certain publicly owned utilities, municipal utilities like LADWP, through their LA 100 initiative, and across all those models, we're just seeing, especially as we adopt aggressive 2030, 2045 goals, storage really being needed at very significant levels. And to arrive at those outcomes, it takes a lot of blood and sweat to shape the inputs, assumptions, and scenarios to identify that. But I think the story holds that we're going to need a significant amount. The procurement levels that we're seeing today are just going to have to continue if we want to achieve these goals. And to be sure we identify the right mix of resources, CSA does engage pretty heavily and in a very technical way on the long duration energy storage side, which we've seen has a potential gap in the current modeling tools, And we're aware that the CEC is engaging pretty significantly to enhance the current modeling tools that are currently available. And we've even commissioned our own study ourselves, which still underscores the point that we need a significant amount of energy storage, but raises an additional perspective backed by data, backed by evidence, saying we may need to consider long duration energy storage more deeply and look at the specific characteristics of the storage portfolio to be sure we can achieve these goals.
And Jen, I want to emphasize, one of the things that CISA, one of the ways we approach market development is through what we call technical regulatory path, where it's not a case per se of a high-level letter saying, "Hey, do storage. We think it's great." It's much more of a skirmishing approach where we go into the guts of a regulatory process or a utility integrated resource plan, and we work at a very technical level to review assumptions and provide our own ideas and thought leadership and inject that into the process. And over time, what that does is it helps everyone understand storage. It helps everyone understand how it's cost effective and where, and it starts to exponentially grow the considerations of storage. And then we see if it's competitive. And what these numbers show, and this is done through multiple very technical studies, highlight that, we not only is there a compelling case for storage, but it's truly needed in California if we're going to achieve these goals. And as a result, we try to take that information back to our members and say, please continue to focus on California. The state needs us. We have to work collaboratively with them if we're all going to achieve our goals. And that's pretty much been the way we've approached it based on this information.
Yeah, and in conjunction with all that technical like IRP modeling is getting RA right, resource adequacy. In California, the resource adequacy program is intended to be sure we have contracted all the resources that we need to manage a reliable portfolio so that we can provide to the CAISO energy markets the resources needed to maintain reliability across all different types of weather, load conditions. And we've had to fundamentally shift how we think about resource adequacy in light of the IRP portfolio is really highlighting how we need to maybe restructure parts of the program to be able to manage a grid with a significant amount of solar and wind and storage resources. And how do we do that? And how do we create a program that ensures that storage resources, where RA capacity is really the lifeblood of getting these projects financed, built, and operating in the CAISO market as intended. And we're having to embark on some pretty significant reforms to date, where we're no longer focusing just on a single peak, but how do we ensure reliability across a 24-hour period? And to that end, there's a lot of effort going into a workshop process at the CPUC to develop those details and shift the paradigm.
So Jen, if it's okay, let's have some fun for a moment. So CISA members often know that RA is a revenue stream that's critical to getting projects developed. So for you as CISA's policy director, what do you make of this in terms of providing the transparency and proper valuation for storage in terms of its month-to-month, day-to-day capacity value?
Yeah. I think that generally the direction that we're heading, in my mind, does help with providing that type of financial security, understanding of what is being expected of storage resources that are contracted under RA. It achieves many of the objectives that we're trying to meet through these RA reform discussions, to be sure we maintain reliability, first and foremost, which is the purpose of the RA program, and do it in a way that does manage and consider ratepayer costs. So I think this is a move in the right direction. There's a lot of devil in the details, and I know it's difficult to understand, which is where we come in to help facilitate and build consensus among our members on this effort.
Okay, yeah, and we're getting some questions in. Thanks everybody. We see your questions and we'll get to it. And we'll talk more about all of these issues as we get into what we're going to accomplish next year and what our priorities are going to be. But Jen, just so you know, some of the questions we're seeing is, what's an incremental amount of storage? How do we define long duration?
Mm-hmm.
What are our expectations there? So we'll happily follow up with those of you who are providing questions and make sure you get that information. All right, let's keep moving on.
Yeah. And we've touched on IRP, RA, but a critical aspect of storage nowadays is we're seeing storage come online. I think the ISO reported it's expecting 4,000 megawatts of storage operational by Q1 2022. And so we're starting to see some data emerge about how storage is operating. In the early days, when we had a very small penetration of storage in the market, a lot of people express concerns about how storage isn't operating in that diurnal fashion that you would expect, soaking up all that solar generation and discharging during the net load peak as needed. But as we've seen a greater penetration of storage, we're seeing its operation really evolve to what we always had hypothesized. It operating in a way inversely with the net load peak to provide that type of diurnal operations that we expected. Of course, there's a lot of technical details about how you bid and schedule resource in the day ahead and real-time markets. How does that also play in with the ancillary services market? But big picture, the ISO, at least from preliminary reports, is really pleased with how storage is materializing in the market.
Yeah, and that's really timely because the summer conditions were very tight, and there was some anxiety going back to the beginning of this year about how much can we trust that storage is really going to absorb the belly of the duck and then discharge in the peak and help us ride through a hot air conditioning evening, late afternoon. And we saw really strong performance from storage. Going back to some of the previous slides with the need for more and more storage, we do know that the more you penetrate, the more the storage portfolio will evolve. And you start with shorter duration storage to go after those peaks. And then as you get more and more storage and more renewables, you probably stretch out the duration of the storage to, so, what we think of as long duration is often 8 hours or more. And we're actually seeing procurements of that amount now, including from non-lithium technologies here in California. So a pretty vibrant portfolio approach is emerging as the CCAs and other key players start to, more aggressively contract for storage and shape their portfolio in ways they know will be needed. And I would call it like it's pretty competitive, but we are seeing some market dynamics that are playing out that indicate to us that we're seeing a healthy market.
Yeah, and we'll continue to monitor that data. It's one of the favorite parts of this job. Also, a lot of the work involves defense at times, where there are areas where, as we're seeing more storage deployed, interconnected, procured, issues emerge around what is the appropriate rate to assess storage charging, or how should things like station power handle hybrid and co-located resources. And so we're starting to see these issues emerge. CSA is engaging in each of these efforts pretty closely, so that we carefully look at what is an appropriate assessment of that charging energy. Does it follow cost causation principles, or does it create a level and consistent playing field with all other resources? And this could be a rabbit hole we all dive into, and happy to go into it in the Q&A, but it really highlights how we're still trying to figure out some of these nitty-gritty technical details, but it's important to ensure that the charge is appropriate and reasonable.
I don't want to slow us down, Jen. I just love that these are great examples of how we learn from the process, and this is a good example of the leadership experience for California, right? You're figuring stuff out, problems you hadn't anticipated do come up, and hopefully others can learn and maybe do things better from how California did it. And just inevitably, with California's greenhouse gas goals being so aggressive, we're going to stumble into these problems sooner and obviously have a large storage market. So, you know, hopefully, I wouldn't say we've got it perfect in every case, but everybody is learning as we go.
Yeah, and sticking on that very technical topic, you know, one of the goals that we're seeing for 2022 is how do we scale this, and to scale, go faster, yet also maintaining reliability. It really goes into looking at the technical interconnection processes, not just creating those pathways, which are important, which we've seen for vehicle to grid interconnection, for example, but also to you know, move toward efficient ways where we can streamline, fast track, even do plug and play in certain cases where we've seen those developments for small Rule 21 non-exporting systems that we think is could be improved. It's still a pilot, but it does lay the groundwork for how we can get to that stage and scale this effort. And on that note, that's looking back on some of what we've seen over 2021, areas that CSA has been involved in. But I'm sure all of you are here to look at 2022. What's the outlook? What do we expect to see? You know, where is CSA going to get engaged in? And there's many different areas, but I just want to underscore the theme of we got to sprint to the finish line in 2045. We have to think about ways we can scale this work, still maintain the objectives of ensuring reliability, you know, financeability of resource development, et cetera, et cetera. And so on that point, you know, over the next, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, we're going to see major storage procurements that are needed. There's going to be shortfalls in 2022 and 2026, as we've seen with some of the modeling done by the CEC and CPUC. But really, I thought one of the great takeaways from that modeling effort is if we get the clean generation and storage procurement that we have ordered to be procured, if those are deployed in time, we can address a lot of our reliability concerns. There is no reliability need as modeled. And so this is, I think, highlights the role that storage can play, especially if we can execute, which is a key focus of 2022. And to do that, we need to be better, faster, and improve on processes where, you know, on the one hand, when it comes to planning and procurement, we can't do just-in-time procurement. As we've seen when we have these macroeconomic shocks like supply chain issues or COVID, this creates a lot of risk in achieving our goals. We need to get ahead of this, which is also a cost consideration for ratepayers, reduces stress and risks. So we got to get to a point of looking further ahead, but also expediting approval processes and streamlining permitting, because when we look at the interconnection queue, when we look at how much storage is being procured and brought online, we have to, you know, be prepared for the tsunami that's coming. In addition to that, we need to expand and accelerate the market for DERs if we really want to achieve our 2045 goals. I do believe that we need an all of the above strategy where distributed energy resources have the advantage of being able to be site in local and constrained areas and have a number of additional benefits of supporting customer needs as well. And to achieve that, you know, we have the cover and the groundwork set with Order 2222, which will, you know, drive ISOs, you know, state commissions to really think through how they can comply. But also, you know, the state has a lot of work to do to value export capacity, be able to really leverage the stranded capacity that could be made available if we figure out those rules around incrementality, valuation, and interconnection, among other things. And as you saw briefly from the RA recap for 2021, this next year is going to be really focused on you know, getting into a virtual room in this case with other stakeholders and figuring out how do we you know, reform RA. You know, we've kind of set the stage of the direction that we want to head, you know, looking at 24-hour slices, but how do we account for that, provide certainty, ensure reliability, and ensure that different types of resources are valued for their attributes. And so these are, significant changes, and doing this in the midst of significant amount of procurement also raises some uncertainty that we want to be able to manage and transition well from. The ISO market, there's always going to be pricing and optimization improvements that we see. This is an area where we continue to focus on. We're starting to see storage operate as intended, but as we see greater and greater penetrations of storage, perhaps some of the concerns that the ISO as the market operator may have some comfort, but how do we ensure that the dispatch tools, the market models, are configured in a way that best optimizes this without constraining their operations in a way that doesn't maximize value or ensure least costs. And so these are all areas that need further refinement. And I think as we get more data, that's going to definitely support and identify where we can focus our efforts, and even develop new market products to value their flexibility. Long-term planning, we don't want to keep our eyes off of ensuring that we are procuring for the right resources and not just focusing narrowly on the near term. As mentioned before, we need to get away from just in time, look at long lead times. Transmission build out, historically has taken, 5, 10, sometimes 15 years. And so we really need to get ahead of this. And I know FERC is focusing on this, the CPUC and ISO are increasingly focusing on this. But to achieve our goals, we need to not only identify what are some of the least regrets procurement that we can do in the near term, but also ensure that we have the right resource mix further out in the years. And to achieve that, we need to be sure we have all the right resources in the toolkit. We're really focusing heavily right now on solar, wind, battery storage, but are there other technologies that may be needed in the form of long duration, or ones that have different resource attributes, like having inertial mass that could provide significant value in the mid and long term. And on this point, the CEC and other government agencies do have a significant role to play. And so we definitely want to be sure that we're making the strategic investments needed in the right pre-commercial technologies, future-proof our ability to meet decarbonization objectives, and the CEC's EPIC program has played a key role there. But hopefully we can co-opt and work together with the federal government as well as they release funds. And lastly, we'd be remiss to not mention resiliency and microgrid opportunities. I think this is a complicated policy issue, but still an important one, especially with wildfire risks, public safety power shutoffs. This is going to persistently be an issue where storage will play a pretty important, significant role to integrate clean generation and capacity as much as possible. But it's been tough to figure out what the right frameworks and valuations are to enable this. But we should continue to work on this and figure this out. So that's going to be another major theme.
Yeah, and in a way, all of these are energy storage markets that are growing in California, and CSA, on behalf of our members, is trying to, as much as we can, to participate, provide perspective and input from the industry side to help have workable markets that companies are willing to invest in and develop solutions for. I think a theme, Jin, you mentioned the sprint, and I like that because that is how it feels for us. But another way of thinking about it is throughout all of this, as we look ahead, there in nowhere in California conversations is there a question of if storage, but everywhere it's the question of how much, what types, how soon, what's the business model. And we are working on that, and that's very important. Obviously, we want to structure healthy markets where the capital and investments and industry companies continue to engage in California. And I'm very confident we can deliver the solutions that California will need and want, but I do think there is a lot of work to tune and detail out how we do this in the coming years. And frankly, there's a lot of urgency on it as well. So with that, I wanted to invite up to the stage here Gareth Elliott. And Gareth is a partner with Sacramento Advocates, a longtime friend of CSA and us, and has worked with us for many years as our lobbyist in Sacramento. And a really fun dimension to Gareth is that he also has served in various roles and worked with various administrations in government. So he really has experience in understanding sort of how decisions can be made and how trade-offs are evaluated, et cetera. So Gareth, welcome. And what we'd really like to do is hear from you on what's in store for California next year as they approach what may be an election year with a large budget, with an additional fire season and uncertain hydro conditions. So I wanted to put you on the spot to try and frame up what you expect the clean energy agendas in California may look like next year, and to read the tea leaves as best you can.
Great. Alex always asks me to read the tea leaves and makes predictions, which is something I'm usually a little hesitant to do, but I'll do my best here. Obviously the last couple of years have been pretty crazy in Sacramento for a variety of reasons: COVID, drought, a lot of things, wildfires. I think things are even crazier in many ways this coming year because of all the uncertainty on elections that are going to be happening in Sacramento. So we've got the entire assembly, every single assembly seat, half the Senate seats, and the statewide offices like governor are all going to be voted on next year. So that's going to, lead to a lot of action and activity. Alex mentioned the budget. We do have an estimation of about $31 billion more than was anticipated when they passed the last budget in July. So a lot of discussions on how to invest that additional money, health and human services, wildfire prevention, clean energy, all those things. I think we're going to be in the mix. Sort of starting January 10th when the governor releases his proposed budget. And then we enter into long discussions about how we arrive at a balance between what the legislature wants and needs and what the governor wants and needs between then and the end of June. So there'll be a lot of discussion and debate related to that. I mentioned uncertainty. There's a lot of flux right now in Sacramento. We've got a lot of legislators, or several legislators have actually resigned their offices in the last couple of months because of other jobs that have come their way. Redistricting is going to throw all of that even further. We just had Senator Stern officially announced today that he's going to run for LA County Supervisor. He's a longtime ally of CSA and supporter of storage. So I expect that the Capitol is going to be less than a full house for a good chunk of the year because a lot of these other opportunities that legislators are going to have. Part of that could also end up meaning changes to not just committee chairs but committee membership. So we'll have to see, sort of what happens in the committees that we're typically active in front of. Committees like energy committees, obviously. Appropriations Committee and the Budget Committee. So that should be pretty interesting. I do think that going into a big election year like this, there's some key areas where the governor's going to be really focused, and I'm confident that clean energy will be one of those, as well as how it all sort of intersects with drought, wildfire, and then obviously the potential for blackouts throughout the summer and early fall. So I think all of those will be key. Obviously, a lot of changes going on at the Public Utilities Commission right now, and there will be a vacancy in the coming days with Commissioner Aceves stepping down from her role. So that'll have to be appointed by the governor at some point, and then the confirmation process that'll go on through the Senate. So we expect that we'll be involved and engaged in that in some ways. So a lot of changes, a lot of turnover happening there. Happy to answer any questions, but I just sort of wanted to flag some of the different uncertainty. The only other thing I would add is because of COVID the last couple of years, there's been some limits and restrictions placed on the amount of legislation that could move through the Capitol. The expectation is that won't occur in the coming year. And so you've got legislators that have really sort of held back for the last couple of years. And I expect that, I kind of call it pent up legislative frustration. I anticipate that there'll be a lot of bills that are really kind of swing for the fences to try to get some big stuff done after they've been sort of limited the last couple of years. So I'm excited. It should be really interesting. I also just want to thank the legislative working group who meets with us on a weekly basis and provides us with important input, insights, and direction. So thanks to all the folks that have been able and willing to join us for that. It's been incredibly helpful. I'm happy to answer any questions, Alex, you or others have.
Sure, Gareth, thank you, and thanks for dialing in. So, I framed it as a question of not if, but how, and Jen has framed it as a sprint by which we have to help California meet its goals. And that's not a trivial sprint. It sounds, Jen, like you're saying there's a 25-year sprint. So I think I'm a little out of shape for that. But Gareth, do you agree? And is that the perception from the Capitol? How is that being interpreted in terms of the role of storage in meeting California's needs?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you in terms that it's not so much of a if, it's how and when and how quickly. So I think there's, we've done a pretty good job of helping people understand over the course of the last 3 or 4 or 5 years the importance and value of storage, and they're looking for it to solve problems. And to me, kind of one of the, we're at a point where we need to help guide them and give them direction as to how they can help us get things to fruition much quicker in order to address and meet some of the needs that the legislature itself has been and the governor's office have stated they want to get to. So it's taking sort of the idea and the concept and actualizing it and helping it actually come to fruition.
Okay, and we definitely expect to do that with a sort of heavy engagement strategy at the legislature this year, and probably in the budget process. And Gareth, I hope you're getting your rest this week before everything starts. So we're getting some fantastic questions. So Gareth, with your blessing to stay on for a moment, let me run through the rest of the slides with Jen. We just have a few more about what's coming up, and then we'll get into Q&A. And for those of you who have been typing in questions, please be patient. We see you, and we'll get to those momentarily. Thanks, Gareth. So let me jump back in, and Jen, with your help, so we've gone through a whole planning process for next year, and the purpose here was to summarize day in, day out, what are you going to get done? So can you walk us through those strategic priorities for next year? And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, we use this with our CSA members, so they know when they sign up for CSA really what we're going to accomplish next year.
Yeah. We covered a little bit of the past and the outlook and really how that all fits in with some of the work that we're going to focus on. We have a broad scope, a broad mandate, but these are the key areas that we've been directed by our membership to focus on, which is let's continue to create and expand storage markets and opportunities. But there's a lot of sub-markets, sub-niches that we want to continue to grow so that we do have an all of the above pathway for all types of storage, behind the meter, in front of the meter, long duration, short duration, lithium, non-lithium, etc. How do we ensure healthy markets for all types of storage, which is to that same end, which includes valuation of all the different attributes, and kind of fitting within the theme of, hey, let's focus on scaling and then sprinting to the finish line. We need to reduce the barriers and any resistance at local levels of permitting, as well as addressing interconnection delays and costs. How can we improve those processes? Because really, we have a lot of the policy frameworks in place. Not to say it's perfect, but we need to address some of those implementation details. And we're going to learn a lot as a lot of these projects start coming online, operating. We have some preliminary data from 2021, but I'm sure as some of you start operating your project, you're going to encounter issues where we need to make fixes over time to the way the ISO operates these storage assets.
Thank you. Yeah, and these are this type of work and these priorities will focus us across multiple areas of California, from the Public Utilities Commission to utility engagement to working with the buyers of storage to behind the meter planning and work, all the way up to the CAISO and wholesale market integration, and then even to working with counties or city or fire officials to help with getting comfortable and speeding up the storage adoption and permitting process. So a lot of work here that CISA is gearing up for next year. I wanted to just highlight though that where we're going is pretty exciting, and day in, day out, I know there's a lot of critical decisions made and business opportunities come, and we have winners and losers. But fundamentally, California is an important market, and that will not change. And if anything, we're seeing so much procurement that we almost can't keep track of it anymore. Jen and I have maintained a database of energy storage procurements by which our members can be informed. And there's so much action on that tool these days that it's quite daunting to make sure we're canvassing everything and all the storage procurement that's going on. And we're going to be really moving forward very quickly in the coming years, and I hope you'll all join us for that. It's going to be exciting. Jen, anything to add before I jump to a few other points?
Yeah, I wish we created a graphic here showing people walking, jogging, and running. So it's not just a 25.
Yeah, show us the sprint. Right? Yeah, we'll be sprinting for a long time. I think that's called a marathon. So, okay, yeah. So stay tuned. Big year coming up ahead. Probably one of the single largest years ever for storage procurement, just from California alone. So I wanted to say, for those of you who aren't members, I hope you'll join CISA. You'll get a lot of good market intelligence. You'll help us take policy positions. You'll get to be very close to your customers or critical collaborators. And we have events, etc. So good times ahead. Join us. Our upcoming events will be listed in just a moment, and there is a lot of action next year. We are anticipating a more normal year in terms of in-person events and normal business functioning after the last year and a half of a COVID situation where a lot of that in-person work was evolving. For those of you who also want to meet up with us, we're going to be attending Intersolar North America and also Energy Storage North America. These are co-located conferences in Long Beach in early January 13th to 15th. We have a bunch of CISA speakers, so I hope you'll join. And if you look at the bottom of this slide, if you're planning to attend, here's a code that can save you a little bit of money, $200 off on the standard conference price. So, and that link is something CISA can provide as a conference partner. So excited to support ISNA and ESNA. This will be a great time, and we'll get everyone back together. Should be really fun. So I'm looking forward to that. And for what it's worth, Jen and I will speak. We'll also have Sarah from our team speaking, and there'll be a lot of interesting topics. And I've seen some of the questions coming up about long duration storage, so I just flagged Sarah's session there on January 12th from 9 to noon all about long duration and how long duration costs and other things are being factored into planning models. And once you're in Long Beach, CISA is having its own mixer. So we do try to get our members together and make sure the CISA network is strong, and that by being part of CISA, you get proximity to key other companies and collaborators or attendees and special guests. So please join us at our mixer, 6 to 8 p.m., January 13th, and we'll issue a big, large email to invite people to that next week. And so here we are now at the Q&A. So for those of you who've waited very patiently, I appreciate it. We wanted to speak to all of these questions, and we've had an array of questions, so it's quite challenging for me to try and summarize these. But Jen, let's get one question out of the way right now. And Gareth, this may involve you a little bit. So there's some discussion about changing rules for solar exports in the form of NEM, net energy metering. This is more of a behind the meter rooftop solar, and questions about what does that do for storage deployment. And Jin, what I'd like, let me just respond to it and then you add your input. Fundamentally, the NEM discussion is about what is the cost structure and incentive for solar providers who push power back out to the grid. I think that's, obviously there's value there. And one thing we're seeing, despite all of the disagreement on the value of solar, one thing that seems to be pretty universal is the high value of storage. So we have been, following this very carefully, really with an eye towards ensuring storage is properly valued. And I think there are a lot of tough trade-offs in the NEM policy discussion, but core to CSA is to make sure storage is properly valued. There's some other key criteria. So Jen, can you have a quick response to those in the audience who are focused on this NEM 3.0 issue?
Yeah, and I definitely want to be able to respond in a nuanced way. So I'll just keep it at, I think right now as proposed, there is I wouldn't say disincentive, but I guess the storage incentive is not strong as currently proposed. I think there are changes that should be made, including related to the fixed charge. That's a pretty big barrier to it. And so I think there's many components and elements that we need to look at pretty closely to be sure that the storage incentive is there. But of course, that's not the only goal of NEM. So we want to be cognizant of that as well.
Yeah, and I would just add, there's a few high-level principles we're using in looking at NEM. One is, are they changing the rules on contracts? And that's, generally we want a healthy market that's commercially viable. So when you do changes that affect the T's and C's from existing contracts, we often scrutinize that. We often also want predictability in markets. And so one of the concerns we're looking at for NEM 3.0 is how developers would have visibility to prices going forward or not, and how we should approach that type of uncertainty. And that's all in addition just to the setting of demand charges and other pieces of the policy that are critical for us. So we're looking at it sort of comprehensively, and that'll be playing out over the next month or 2 or 3 or 4. So we'll see, but certainly a big deal. So hopefully that helps. And then I have some questions, including from, it's maybe Yunko, and it's about planning for storage. So Jen, let's go to the planning part. You've claimed, you as CSA have claimed that over 40 gigawatts or more is needed. So can you just highlight, if that all gets built, how much of that do you expect will be 4-hour storage or long duration? What do you define as long duration, and how's that portfolio going to come together?
Yeah. I mean, long duration storage doesn't necessarily have a standard industry definition. I think for the purposes of the CPUC's modeling, they look at it as 8 hours or more. I know that it also differs again for CEC EPIC programs. They're looking at 10 hours or more. And the way that they looked at it in those like SB100 models is long duration storage had that 8 hour or more cutoff. Even though when they looked at battery storage, the duration of the model is actually modular. They'll add lithium ion batteries that could be 4 and 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, however long duration. And they use pump hydro as a proxy for long duration resources.
Yeah, and Jen, I would add that, when these procurement entities make decisions about the types of storage, they could add small modular ones. They could look at high overhead upfront costs and cheap recycling costs, and they're wrestling with all those trade-offs, trying to make smart decisions. And time and again, the models have indicated that you want an array of storage, and we're actually seeing that now, even in near-term procurements. We have a question from Mohammed about have the CCAs, through their Joint Powers Authority, which is called CC Power, have they made decisions on buying long duration storage. And I do have some updates for you, Mohammed. Yes, they have. They're basically, they've announced a lithium-ion long-duration project to the tune of 8-hour storage. We also know that another CCA is buying a different technology storage, a flow battery for some of its long-duration needs, and we understand there's more coming. So sort of seeing a bit of the Wild West in terms of all these different technologies competing and getting picked up. And depending on the risk and forecast profiles of the various players, an interest in having a different type of storage or not. And so that's all getting worked out. And generally, this is okay in CISA's world. We want competitive, healthy markets. We typically try to incubate newer technologies to help them get ready to compete in prime time. And then once they're there, we want good planning models that help the buyers like the CCAs or utilities to make smart decisions. And I think we're not quite there yet, but we're getting close to where they can evaluate all the different options and how long this resource will perform for and what they want, what the rules will be, and they'll make decisions accordingly. And then a secondary issue is, how do we execute? How do we make sure this happens? And we're really focused on markets that are transparent and visible and understandable with good contract terms and market competitive insurance rates, financing, et cetera. So Jen, on that note, I have a question from Peter Zullo. Does CISA believe SCE's recent utility-owned storage plan may be mimicked by PG&E and SDG&E? And if so, could that dampen private developer interest in investing in California going forward?
Wow, you're asking all the tough questions, Alex. NAM and now utility-owned storage. But I think for utility-owned storage, I'd like to hope that people are viewing that within the context of the situation that it was in. I know a lot of our member companies, and we also, saw a lot of concerns with the process by which they arrived at their utility-owned storage project. And it not necessarily creating a level playing field, at least from our view. And so we're hoping that we can avoid these types of situations. And I guess I should preface it by saying we're not opposed to utility-owned storage. We just want a level playing field where they can both compete, and the winner wins out. But given the specific situation here, where the usual processes may not necessarily have been followed, the same rules may not necessarily have applied. That's where some of the concerns that we had on a level playing field. And we're hoping that this isn't a precedent set forth going forward, and that we avoid these circumstances altogether, so that we can, from the onset, have a level playing field, consider both options, and allow them to compete with each other. Because I think the situation where we had 8, 10, 11 months to bring these projects online really created a situation where maybe SC in that case saw this as the only option.
Yeah, and I would just add, Peter, that we were worried about the precedential impacts here. This was an unusual circumstance, and we know that it was a very bitter pill to get comfortable with for a lot of developers who are competing fairly. We looked at San Diego and how they approached this urgent procurement need, and they approached it in a way that I think we viewed as more fair, having gone through the process of normal interconnection processes, et cetera. So we are trying to gatekeep against that precedential impact. We're trying to ensure healthy markets, and I do think we've made enough noise that key regulators and decision makers in California are aware of the problematic impacts of this, and that the better outcome by far would be to have longer lead time procurements where everybody can compete fairly, even interconnections can get completed in time, and then we avoid this problem of sort of reliability-based workarounds, urgency, things like that can create a desire for people to deviate from normal practices. So I hear you, though, it's a tough one. I hope you'll stay investing in California, Peter, of course. So unfortunately, we're out of time. And so I wanted to sort of wrap up now and wish everyone a good day, and thank you so much for taking time to join Jen and I and Gareth today. It's very fun, and we're here at CSA, and you can access us at info@Storage Alliance or come to our website anytime. We also look forward to talking with any of our members almost anytime. And for those of you who aren't members, we are still available and would love to connect and understand how you're approaching storage markets and getting involved. So with that, I wanted to thank everyone. I hope you had a good day. And this webinar will be recorded and put on the CSA website. So with that, we can wrap up. Thank you so much and have a good day.
Thank you.